If you're visiting Australia from the USA for the first time, then in this video I've got 5 things for you that you should know about Australia before you visit. Stick around to the end. I've also got a sneaky little extra bonus tip that might push a few buttons and cause a bit of controversy for some of you guys from the USA. Alright, let's get stuck into it. 5 things you need to know about Australia before you visit from the USA. Okay guys, thank you for tuning in to my video. My name's Andrew. I've started a new travel series here on my channel I'm calling the Clueless Traveller, and today is another installment in my Clueless Traveller vlog series that I'm doing. As I've said in the quick little intro, today we're going to be looking at 5 things that I think people visiting from the USA should know about Australia before visiting. And even if you aren't visiting anytime soon, these will hopefully be 5 tips that will sort of inform you a little bit more about Australia, parts of our culture, and things to expect when you do eventually get here. Alright, so these tips are in no particular order. We're going to start off tip number 1, and that is the size of Australia. Now, many of you might know that we are an island nation, and you might think that we're just a relatively small island down here in the South Pacific. However, it's quite a large continent. I can't remember off the top of my head. I did my research for the video and everything's gone straight out one ear and out the other, but I'm pretty sure that the size of the continental USA is roughly, Australia is roughly 78 to 80% of the size of the continental USA. So that's including Alaska. So it's quite a large country, and in comparison, for the size of our country, our population in comparison to the USA is extremely small. The population here in Australia is around about 24 million people, and obviously the US is upwards of 335 million. So the population here is quite small compared to the US, and when you put that smaller population into a country that's roughly the same size, it gives you some idea of the remoteness that Australia has in terms of people per square kilometre or per mile. It's quite an alarming statistic compared to the USA. So to give you a bit of perspective, and I will put the correct information up here on the screen when I find it, because like I said, I've just completely forgotten everything I was going to say. But I'm pretty sure in the Northern Territory, or here in the state of Queensland where I live, there's one farm, a cattle farm, that is, I believe, the same size as the state of Texas. So that gives you an idea of how remote and how big this country is. The majority of that 24 million people that we have here in Australia is mainly situated in the main coastal city areas. There are a few large regional hubs within the interior of Australia, but the majority of the population is fairly close to the coast, and most of the capital cities in Australia are all on a river, because as you can imagine, being an island nation, access to deep water, ports in the ocean, and fresh water as well with the rivers is quite important. So there you go. That gives you guys a bit of an idea of the size of the country in comparison to where you're coming from. And in relation to that, I think you guys, when you're organising a trip here, just keep in mind of how spread out everything is. The travel times between major cities is substantial. There's 3 main capital cities on the eastern seaboard. That's Brisbane, which is the capital up here in Queensland, which is about an hour north of where I am. Brisbane, Sydney, and then Melbourne down in the southern part of Australia. And flight time between each of those destinations is about an hour and a half. Roughly 1,000 kilometres between each of those capital cities. If you were to drive from here to Melbourne, which I have done before, it's roughly a 24-hour drive. So, and then if you're looking at Western Australia, Perth, which is on the Indian Ocean on the western coast of Australia, then from here in Brisbane you're looking at roughly a 6 or 7 hour flight over to Perth. And then between here and Perth there's pretty much not much. It's a lot of desert, a lot of wilderness, a lot of grazing and agriculture, not many people. So just keep that in mind when you are travelling here, that it is very spread out, the population's spread out, and travel time between destinations can be quite significant. Alright, that's tip number 1. On to tip number 2. Okay guys, we're back here at the house. It's just a little bit too windy outside to be filming today. We're going to move on to tip number 2. And before I hit number 2, I just thought I'd mention in the last video that I shot for tip number 1, you would have noticed a city or some skyscrapers and a city skyline behind me in the background. That was Surfers Paradise, which is the main tourist part of the Gold Coast where I come from in Australia. The Gold Coast is the tourist capital of Australia, and Surfers Paradise is like where all of the hotels and everything are, right on the beach. I'm putting together a playlist, and I'll put a link to the playlist down below. I'm going to be making a whole heap of Gold Coast content. So if you're interested to learn more about the Gold Coast, I've made 2 videos already, so you can go and check them out now, and there'll be a bunch more put up there as I make them. Alright, let's get on to tip number 2. And tip number 2 is about the tipping culture here in Australia, which compared to you guys over there in the States is pretty much like non-existent. We have a high minimum wage here in Australia. The typical minimum wage, I think, is around $20 or $21 for adults. Kids, 15, 16, 17-year-olds who work in fast food and things like that are on, I think, around about $17 an hour. So compared to, the States where the minimum wage is around about $7, our minimum wage is quite high, so we don't need to work for tips. So don't feel obligated when you go to a restaurant or a bar. If you've received service somewhere, you don't have to tip. You don't have to feel obligated to do it. If you receive, fantastic service, then by all means go ahead and tip, but it's not an obligation here in Australia. No one's going to get their nose out of joint and get, real dirty with you if you haven't tipped them. I will say, however, though, as someone who, up until the pandemic hit in 2020, I'd spent the previous 10 years or so prior to that working on and off in the hospitality industry. And while our minimum wage is high, and the casual rate for hospitality workers is a touch higher, it is casual work, and the people who work in those industries, they aren't afforded things that people in full-time or part-time work receive. They don't receive annual holidays, they don't receive sick pay, they don't have superannuation paid. Some of them do on some circumstances. Superannuation is like our 401k. So bear in mind that if you are being served, in a hotel or a restaurant, a bar, brewery, cafe, wherever you are, and you do receive, exemplary service, and by all means, I would encourage that you do slip them an extra couple of dollars. I wouldn't say it has to be 20% like you guys do over there. 10%, 20%. I would probably, if you can spare a few dollars, slip that to the person who's serving you. It would be much appreciated for them, and I know it makes a big difference for them when it comes to things like, just basic things like buying presents for family at the holidays and having a few extra dollars to buy some nicer food rather than eating ramen all the time. It's not, it's not an obligation here. You don't have to tip. Don't feel obligated to do it. But however, if you're a good person and you've received good service, then by all means go ahead and tip. All right, let's get on to tip number 3. And tip number 3 is about the dangerous animals that we have here in Australia. I spent a very brief time in the States, in Los Angeles, just prior to the pandemic hitting in late 2019. And every Uber drive that I got, every time I struck up conversation with someone when they heard my accent, whether it was, at a bar or on the bus or the metro or something, everyone always asks about the crazy animals that we have here in Australia. They're always worried about spiders and snakes and sharks and all these things. And honestly, the vast majority of the dangerous animals that we have here in Australia, like the spiders and the snakes that I know so many people are afraid of, including myself. I'm not a fan of snakes, and and spiders, to be honest. But honestly, if they've gone before you even arrive. Like, you have to be really unfortunate to find yourself getting bitten by a snake or getting bitten by a spider. 99.999% of the time, they're going to run away from you before you even know that they're there, right? Having said that, there are a few things that, you know, I would recommend for you guys if you're coming here for the first time, or if you're coming here on another trip and you want some advice on this stuff. So if you're going on a hike, definitely wear hiking boots, long pants, possibly even some socks, some socks pulled up underneath those long pants. You just want to avoid the very rare incidents that you might get bitten. Check, your surroundings all the time. Don't go putting your hand inside dead logs or grabbing trees and things like that without having a look first. We do have snakes, we do have spiders here, they are there, but like I said, 9 times out of 10 they've gone before you have got anywhere near them. So another couple of things that I would say about the dangerous animal things is when it comes to crocodiles. Now, they are one animal, them and sharks, but definitely crocodiles are on land as well as water. So I would say the one animal that you do want to be extremely cautious of is the crocodile, the saltwater crocodile specifically. Now, if you get a map of Australia and you draw a line sort of around about, I'm in Queensland, once you head north of around about the Maryborough, Hervey Bay region, anywhere there and above, you could basically just draw a line from there all the way to the other side of Australia on the west coast, and anywhere north of those two places, I would say avoid any body of water. And that's not being facetious. Unless you're with, like an accredited snorkel guide who's taking you out to the Barrier Reef, or you're with a guide who's taking you to a freshwater swimming hole or something like that. Honestly, be very vigilant around any body of water north of that line. Crocodiles are extremely good at camouflage. They could be in a tiny puddle of water. You honestly wouldn't think that there's anything dangerous there, and you turn your back and next thing you're gone. They are that dangerous, and I don't know what the statistics are, but basically if a crocodile grabs you, that's it, you're done. That's the one thing that I would say to be cautious about dangerous animals here is the crocodiles. We do have sharks. There are sharks everywhere around the world. They're not just specifically in Australia. You guys over in the States have got sharks everywhere as well. Unfortunately with sharks, if it's your time, it's your time, But so I'm not going to discourage you from going in the surf. But having said that, I would pay attention to the lifeguards that are on duty. They're very quick to get people out of the water if there is a shark. For example, here on the Gold Coast where I live, we have a fairly successful yet controversial shark net system here and a shark baiting system. We've only had a handful of shark fatalities here since the 1960s when those measures were introduced. And just the other day, I think yesterday from me filming this, here at Burleigh Heads on the Gold Coast, which is a super popular beach spot, super popular, awesome surf spot. There was a big bait ball of fish that had made their way inside the shark nets and were between the shark nets and the shore. And the surf lifeguards were super quick to get everyone out of the water. They were making announcements. They had drones in the air, helicopters, and told everyone to get up on the beach, out of the water, and waited until the sharks were gone, and then everyone could get back in. So my tip for you in regards to sharks is to swim between the red and yellow flags wherever you are. If you're at an unprotected beach and there's no surf life-saving around, I wouldn't go swimming in the water. That's purely just a common sense thing. I know it can get super hot here and the water looks really inviting, but if there's no one there to let you know that the water's safe, then I would avoid the water. So, and the other thing as well, like you guys seriously over there in the States, you make such a big deal about the snakes and the spiders. But I mean, you guys have got apex land predators over there. You've got black bears, brown bears, you've got wolves, you've got mountain lions, you've got even moose that will fuck you up. Like you guys have got big, dangerous animals that will actually hunt you down and eat you. We don't really have that here in Australia. We have dingoes, which are wild dogs, which will hurt you if you approach them, but nothing on the scale of what you guys have got over there. My gosh, like you guys are so worried about seeing a spider or a snake. I mean, if I was on a hike over in the States and I thought I saw a mountain lion, there would be a big brown pile where I was standing previously. Like, just put it into perspective, right? You guys have got some big land-based apex predators that hunt and kill and do kill humans every year. So just keep that into perspective. We don't have any of that over here. All right, let's get on to tip number 4, guys. All right, guys, it's time for tip number 4. And you might think it's a bit weird that I'm doing this tip that I'm about to talk about on this super cloudy day. But tip number 4 when you come and visit Australia is that you have to remember that the hole in the ozone layer is like right above us. Australia and New Zealand both have the world's highest rates of melanoma skin cancer. Unfortunately, just the way that pollution and everything that's occurred over the last few hundred years, everything is precipitated to create the hole in the ozone layer right above us and Antarctica. So the UV rays get through, and on a cloudy day like this, you can see it's real gloomy and cloudy, and it actually feels a little bit cool, where as of recording this, it's like December 28, December 29, so smack bang in the middle of summer for us here in Australia. But on a cloudy day like this, you can still get sunburnt. It's actually, you can get sunburnt more severely in cloudy weather like this, believe it or not. I'm not 100% on the science, but I do believe it has something to do with the clouds dispersing the UV rays more evenly, so you're more of a chance of getting burnt all over your body, as opposed to if the radiant heat from the sun was just coming down and getting you on your exposed parts. But yeah, so everywhere around Australia, most shops you'll be able to buy sunblock. We call it Sunscreen here in Australia. At the beaches, most surf lifesaving clubs will have free sunscreen for you, sunblock. A lot of places that you go and visit, like theme parks and things like that, will also have free sunblock for you. People do actually get 3rd-degree burns here from the sunburn, so you can get burnt quite significantly, and believe it or not, it can take you in the middle of the day, between around about 11 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It can only take about 15 minutes for you to get really badly burnt if you aren't protected. So we have a slogan here in Australia, it's slip, slop, slap. I think it's had a couple of things added to it now since I was a kid, but basically it's reminding everyone to put on a hat, some sunscreen and a shirt. We try and encourage people to wear long sleeve shirts, wide brimmed hats, and some sunblock and zinc on their face and neck and ears if they're going to spend any prolonged time in the sun. And I just thought, as it was a nice cloudy day, I thought I'd also show you something pretty cool that you guys might be pretty impressed with. If you have a look behind me here, let me zoom in for you. That right there is a bunch of wild kangaroos. I'm not in an animal park or anything like that. I'm at a spot here on the Gold Coast where there's a big bunch of wild kangaroos. So I just thought that'd be something cool to chuck on the video for you guys. So you go. Tip number 4, remember to wear your sunblock. You can get sunburnt really easily here in Australia and New Zealand if you're visiting both. But yeah, just bear in mind the sun's super hot. The UV rays are much more intense than they are in the northern hemisphere. And yeah, just really be diligent about it when you come and visit. All right, tip number 5. All right, guys, it's time for tip number 5. Now, stick around. I do have an extra little tip coming for you after this one. I know I did mention that at the start of the video, I just thought I'd remind you. But tip number 5 is to do with the proximity of Australia in regards to a certain continent that we're close to, and that is Asia. So it's really hard to sort of pinpoint Australia as an Asian country or a South Pacific country. We kind of sit in the middle, and as most people will know, we have British heritage, so a lot of sort of Western Anglo-Saxon influence, as well as obviously, before white people like my ancestors got here, there was obviously the indigenous people who are the oldest living culture on the planet. But just geographically, we're located sort of smack bang right on the line between the South Pacific and Asia. Our closest neighbours are Papua New Guinea and Indonesia to our north. You can if you go up to the Torres Strait Islands, which are on the north tip of Queensland, it's sort of only, maybe an hour or two in a boat until you hit the waters of Papua New Guinea. Bali is probably the most popular tourist destination for a lot of Australians. It's only around about a 5 to 6 hour flight from most capital cities to Bali. And as a result of us being situated so close to Asia, you would actually be surprised to know that Australia has some fantastic Asian cuisine. Now, Australia doesn't really have its own cuisine. We don't really have our own identity when it comes to food, because we're such a melting pot, a multiracial country, a multicultural country. We sort of don't have our own identity when it comes to cuisine. Thankfully, with Asia being so close, that we do have a lot of immigrants from Asia that live in Australia, and they've brought their wonderful food with them. On top of the amazing Asian food that you will find here in Australia, there's also food from the subcontinent here is fantastic as well. So whether that is Indian, Pakistani, Nepalese food is actually quite popular here, which might seem a bit weird, but it's super popular. The top Asian cuisines in Australia, number one is definitely, I would say more so than Chinese food, is Thai. You will find a Thai restaurant on almost every corner in Australia. They're everywhere, and it's really hard to find a bad Thai restaurant. They are out there, but I would recommend, if you're looking for a good Thai feed when you are here, just jump on Google or Yelp or whatever the app is that you use to find your restaurants. And if you go for one of your top 10 results in that local area, you'll be able to find great Thai food. Malaysian food's really good in Australia. Vietnamese, we have lots of Vietnamese people that live in Australia. And thankfully they've brought their pho with them, and some fantastic Vietnamese restaurants can be found. Personally, myself, I love Thai food. I've never been to Thailand, but I can vouch for a lot of my friends that have travelled and lived in Thailand that the food here that we have in our Thai restaurants are just as good as what you'll get in Thailand. As I mentioned before, Bali is quite a popular spot, and you will find some Indonesian and Balinese restaurants here in Australia as well. And of course, like everywhere else in the world, we do have Chinese food here. And while we do have that really Western style version of Cantonese food, like honey chicken and that kind of stuff, honey prawns, you will find pockets of cities around Australia that do have different regional Chinese food as well. So I live on the Gold Coast here in Australia. I live in Southport, and here in Southport we have Chinatown, and a lot of the Chinese restaurants that we have here in Southport are from the Xinjiang region, as opposed to, normally when you think Chinese food, you think that sort of typical Western Cantonese style, fried rice, honey chicken, that kind of stuff. But we do have, in Southport alone, I think there's probably 4 or 5 Xinjiang region foods. So yeah, there's a big range of Asian food here in Australia. The other cuisines that we do here are amazing as well. So especially if you're heading to some of the capital cities, Melbourne, in particular, really, the food in Melbourne is amazing. Italian food down there is just incredible. It doesn't really matter what you're into, you're going to find it in Melbourne. Sydney and Brisbane both have really good ethnic restaurants as well. So just keep that in mind when you come here to Australia. I would definitely recommend that you check out some of the Asian cuisine that we have on offer. All right, now it's time for that little bonus tip I was mentioned to you earlier. Okay, bonus tip. Time for a bonus tip for you guys. And this one, as I said at the start of the video, it could potentially be a little bit controversial for some of you people from America coming to Australia. And this bonus tip has to do with coffee in Australia and our coffee and cafe culture. You'll be quite surprised when you do come and visit Australia to see that we don't have many Starbucks restaurants here. Starbucks tried and pretty much failed in the early 2000s to kind of take Australia by force when it comes to coffee, but what they didn't realise is that going back to the 50s and the 60s with the massive immigration that Australia had from particularly the Mediterranean places like Italy, Greece, the Balkans. We've got lots of, we've got a big Balkan community here. Even some of the, Eastern European countries like Hungary, places like that, they brought their coffee and cafe culture to Australia from, like mid-century. And the cafe scene here in Australia is super strong. A lot of communities are based around their cafes, their local cafes, and everyone, not everyone, but the vast majority of cafes and restaurants that do coffee tend to invest fairly heavily in decent coffee machines, training their baristas up. We have like multiple barista schools in each city. It's taken quite seriously. And what you will find compared to the coffee that you guys have over there in the States is that the vast majority of the coffee that you'll get, even at a restaurant or even a small local cafe, they'll all have espresso machines. You will pretty much, I don't think I've ever seen a place in Australia that has like a pot of coffee, you get in Denny's or IHOP or something like that. Over here, it's all espresso coffee. More and more places are popping up now that do more artisan styles of coffee, pour over, drip, cold brew, that kind of stuff as well. But if you haven't visited here before, definitely, like I mentioned in the previous tip about the food, get your Yelp app out, your Google, whatever it is that you use to find food and things to do in your local area, and just look for the top 10 cafes in your area, and I can almost guarantee you that none of them are going to be a chain. They'll be an independent coffee store, cafe, and you're guaranteed to have pretty much the best coffee you've ever had, unless you've been to Italy or somewhere like that. The coffee in Australia is really, really good. Just for an example, like I live here in Southport, and within a 10-minute walk in each direction from me, I've probably got, I would reckon, this is not an exaggeration, I've probably got 7 or 8 really good cafes within a 10-minute walk in each direction from me, where I can go and get a consistently great coffee. So bear that in mind when you do come here, guys. The coffee's really good, and I guarantee once you get home back to the States, you'll be trying to search out somewhere in your local area that does coffee as good as you get in Australia, and I can pretty much guarantee you that you won't find it. All right, if you guys have got some coffee spots over in the States that you think are really good and that I should check out when I do head back, I'd love to hear from you. I'm a big coffee buff, and I do have some more Australian coffee videos coming soon, and I will also, when I start traveling around the world again, I will be looking at trying coffees in different places as well. I love coffee. I'd love to hear your stories about Australian coffee, and like I said, if you've got any recommendations for me back in the States, let me know in the comments down below. Alright, that's going to wrap the video up, guys. I'm sorry I didn't get as much footage as I wanted outside. I picked a super rainy, gloomy weekend here on the Gold Coast to shoot this, so unfortunately not as much cool blue skies, golden beaches as what I would have liked to have had for you. If you want to see more of that kind of stuff, more of the Gold Coast, more of Australia, check out the playlist that I'm going to put down below. Hit the subscribe button. I'd love for you to join me on my journey as I grow as a travel vlogger, and hopefully make my way back to the States really soon. absolutely love it over there. I love you guys. You're an amazing people, and I can't wait to get back. All right, thank you very much, guys. Hit the like button down below. Leave me a comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks very much for watching.